creo, no sé,
Perfecto. Voy a empezar el evento en inglés para que la gente sepa que
Recording
hay
in
traducción al
progress.
español.
por supuesto. Adelante.
Good afternoon, and we give you a heartfelt welcome to our side event.
Buenas tardes, les damos una calurosa bienvenida a nuestro evento que está en el marco de este Foro Político 2021. Se denomina Empoderando a las Personas para proteger el planeta en el contexto del COVID-19, la contribución del ODS 16 y el derecho a los accesos de medio ambiente y a la recuperación sustentable y resiliente. Se realiza juntamente con Costa Rica, con Uruguay, con Francia, con Santa Lucía y con Suiza, y con las comisiones, con la CEPAL, con la Comisión Europea para Europa, con Asia-Pacífico y también con UN Environment. Este evento nos va a brindar la posibilidad de generar las bases para un diálogo regional con representantes de los Estados miembros, entidades de Naciones Unidas y otras partes interesadas relevantes. El acuerdo de Escazú, la Convención de Aarhus y otros desarrollos regionales y nacionales que pretenden buscar políticas participativas para la sustentabilidad. Y eso es lo que nosotros vamos a ver. Vamos a prestar especial atención a cómo la implementación de los derechos de acceso a medio ambiente, la participación pública y la justicia pueden apoyar vías eficaces para poder crear mejores desarrollos sustentables y una recuperación mucho más potente dentro del contexto del COVID-19. Este evento se va a realizar tanto en español como en inglés y va a haber interpretación simultánea para ambos, y también vamos a hablar en español, y esto se está transmitiendo en vivo a través de la página web de CEPAL. Es un gran placer para mí darle la bienvenida a nuestros invitados, al señor Solano, ministro de Asuntos Exteriores y de Culto de Costa Rica, al señor Carlos Amorín, embajador extraordinario, plenipotenciario y representante permanente de Uruguay en Naciones Unidas, y a Alicia Bárcena, secretaria ejecutiva de la Comisión Económica para América Latina y el Caribe. Vamos a realizar este segmento en español y sin más entonces, I offer the floor to Mr. Rodolfo Solano, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Costa Rica. Thank you very much. A warm greeting for everyone that accompanies us during this event. A greeting from Casa Amarilla, which is the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Costa Rica. Good afternoon. I would like to warmly greet our dear friend Alicia Bárcena, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Mr. Carlos Amorín, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Uruguay to the United Nations. And I would also like to greet all ministers and government representatives, and very especially the representatives of civil society that accompany us today. For Costa Rica, present pro tempore president of ECLAC, it's a great pleasure.
La discusión de los diferentes paneles. En tiempos de crisis globales, como las que vivimos desde hace algún tiempo, se hace esencial volver a la raíz de lo que somos, a nuestra misma esencia, y a partir de ahí replantear nuestro camino y reconstruir mejor. Los derechos humanos están en lo más profundo de toda persona y por tanto deben ser piedra angular en la formulación de nuestros planes, políticas y compromisos por lograr sociedades más solidarias, inclusivas y justas. Es precisamente en este orden de ideas que debemos recordar que en nuestra esencia está también el entorno natural. La existencia de los seres humanos está totalmente condicionada al acceso al agua potable, al aire limpio y a la tierra fértil. Es decir, dependemos absolutamente del medio ambiente
Rely
para
on the environment for our survival and for the full exercise of all our human rights.
Entre más sano y protegido esté el
The
entorno
healthier and the protected the environment is, we will be able to better exercise our rights. Within this context, it is where we find that SDG 16 plays a fundamental and relevant role, especially in its environmental dimension. The right to a healthy environment is at the very heart of fair, peaceful, and inclusive exercise of all the other human rights. One way of making a contribution so that we can establish a healthy environment is indeed that we are able to guarantee the exercise of human rights of access in environmental aspects. As you can see, everything is intertwined. One thing leads to the other. And if a single link is missing, the chain simply breaks away, damaging all people and their better opportunities for development. A fundamental link, access rights in environmental matters, is indeed what treaties such as Escazu and the Aarhus Convention deal with. These are development tools that place people first, that empower them so that they may become co-participants and co-responsible parties of their own fate. As from our region, undoubtedly, the ratification of the Escazu Agreement strengthens the rule of law, democracy, transparency of the state, and the full exercise of human rights. In addition, we strengthen regional multilateralism as a dynamic treaty capable of producing practical results in a very short period of time, directly benefiting people, thus contributing towards the new processes aimed at socioeconomic, inclusive, green and solidarity type of recovery, built jointly from bottom up. Its sister treaty, the Aarhus Convention, has already been applied successfully for decades, and it has become a very important instrument for citizens' democratic action. For Costa Rica, the sustainable development can only occur if we have, from the very onset, the participation of all social actors, and the Escazu process has been an example in this sense. The time has come to accelerate the transition of representative democracy towards a participative democracy, strengthened with inclusive decisions and actions that respond to the needs and demands of people and respects, above all, the principle of intergenerational equality. Dear friends, the Costa Rican Minister of Foreign Affairs continues to strongly support this treaty, and we are committed with its prompt ratification and implementation. Costa Rica continues to preside the directive board of the agreement and continues to favor its suitable capabilities for its full implementation, because we're fully convinced that it is an extremely legitimate instrument in democratic and environmental matters that strengthens the institutional framework of both Latin America and the Caribbean. I would like to thank those that accompany us today from different parts of the world for their decisive support to democracy, for their commitment with human rights related to public participation, access to information, and access to justice in environmental aspects in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in general for all regions. Your presence here evidences international solidarity that effective multilateralism is capable of achieving. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias por su mensaje, Su Excelencia, el Ministro de Relaciones Exteriores y Culto de Costa Rica, señor Rodolfo Solano. Toca el turno a la palabra a Su Excelencia, el embajador y
Thank you
permanente.
very much. Now, the ambassador of Uruguay before the UN has the floor. You have the floor. Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank the presence of His Excellency Rodolfo Solano, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Costa Rica, our dear friend Alicia Bárcena. We recognize her role, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, colleagues, special greetings to the panel members that will take part in this event, and dear delegates. On behalf of the Uruguayan government, it is a pleasure to cordially welcome you to this side event organized by my country in collaboration with the governments of Costa Rica, Mexico, Finland, St. Lucia, and likewise by ECLAC, European Commission, Asia Pacific Commission, and the UNDP within the framework of the high-level political forum. This side event takes place in a very timely moment for the region. Only a few months ago, we celebrated the enforcement or entry into force of the Escazu Agreement, and my country is proud of that. And in Uruguay, the first global meeting of focal points in the Montevideo program of environmental rights. On the other hand, the high-level political forum has been analyzing in recent days the advances, progress, and challenges of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable, Resilient Recovery of SDG 13 on climate change and SDG 16. Today, we have invited several countries of our region and of other regions, as well as stakeholders, in order to share experiences on the environmental dimension of SDG 16. Especially in a context like this one, SDG 16 emerges as a powerful instrument to achieve transformative changes for the persons and the planet. Particularly, we would like to highlight the environmental information access rights, public participation in environmental decision-making processes, and access to justice in environmental affairs. It allows to build more transparent and more inclusive participatory societies, responding to the needs of our populations. Access rights are also useful to facilitate reaching the objectives of the 2030 Agenda, with the, of course, always leaving no one behind. We need to say that our environment, ecosystem, and life on Earth is the basis for prosperity. The pandemic has caused devastating damages at social and economic levels, and has not prevented exacerbation of climate crisis. As the UN Secretary General has said, we are far from the objectives of 1.5 degrees centigrade of the Paris Accord. Temperatures and extreme meteorological events are on the rise. In order to build a stable environment and healthy one, we need to count with the persons, with the people. We can only revert environmental degradation if we act in a coordinated and consistent manner among all of us with the participation of all social players. That is why empowering people to a healthy planet is of vital importance. Uruguay considers environmental and climate issues as a priority. Our country has adopted forefront measures in order to safeguard our environmental capital and natural resources. Uruguay had an active participation in the drafting and implementation of the multilateral agreement that ended with the happy result of the Escazu Agreement and was one of the first ratifying countries. Now, we are in the process of implementing, enforcing its main principles and provisions. Although Uruguay already had an important legislative framework of access to environmental information, ensuring participation in the decision-making process, and broad access to justice. Of course, the implementation of the Escazu Agreement will be a step forward, a progress on that basis. I thank you again for your presence, and we are sure that the exchange of views that we will have will allow us to go definitely to the achievement of our objectives in favor of a better planet for all. I wish you the best of successes for this meeting that we are beginning. Thank you. Thank you for your words, and we thank the intervention of the permanent representative of Uruguay, Mr. Carlos Amorin, and now the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, Mrs. Alicia Bárcena. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
I'm so pleased to have this concurrence of I would say, of like-minded countries that are accompanying this process of Escazú. Voy a pasar al español porque quiero saludar en primerísimo lugar.
I will now move to Spanish. I would like to greet Minister of Foreign Affairs and Workshop of Costa Rica, our dear friend Rodolfo Solano, who is chairing ECLAC. And I thank you for all the leadership you have exercised in this magnificent chair that will continue most likely until we celebrate the first conference of the parties of this Escazu Agreement. I will tell you then why. I would like to greet Ambassador Carlos Amorin, permanent representative of Uruguay before the UN, a magnificent professional who has been so close to us. And thank you very deeply for joining in the co-organization of this event, and also to the many other events that we have shared with you. I want to greet Colonel Charles, Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change of Jamaica, who is with us. And thank you all, everyone who is here in this event that we have organized jointly, Uruguay, Costa Rica, France, Mexico, St. Lucia, and Switzerland. And of course, our sister commissions of Europe, Asia Pacific, UNDP, or rather the UN Program for the Environment. It is a great privilege to cordially welcome all the representatives of member states and stakeholders, interested parties. We have representatives from civil society, very important ones, and I would say of several sectors that have been actively participating in this very important process. I would like to welcome the representatives of Burkina Faso, Finland, Indonesia, UK, and Thailand, because you have achieved important progress in the implementation of access rights in the environmental matters, as well as the millennial movement, two institutions that have worked in a significant way all these rights. This event, empowering persons to protect the planet in COVID times, as our dear friend Rodolfo said, occurs in a very timely moment because the high-level political forum is taking place, and it's important to highlight, as they said, SDG 16, which is the partnership, the inclusion, and SDG 13 as well. And this event invites us to exchange and reflect on the link it exists between the right to information, citizen participation, and environmental justice, and how to achieve this in order to move forward in a sustainable, more inclusive and integrating development. Access rights offer us a road of dialogue to move forward in the 2030 agenda. And here the Institute of World Resources has supported this process of access to information, justice, citizen participation that began in 1992. It was then that we started with Principle 10. And it is now when this is bearing fruit. And so we are so pleased, because the truth is that the region is going over a very complex time. And the whole world, we see that there is like a discontent, disenchantment, or discomfort of the population because of inequality to a large extent. But also they're inviting us to say, here we are, the youth, the women, the indigenous peoples, all the players are here because we want to participate. We want to build the future together. And for that, we need to rethink social pacts in a transformative style and manner. Why? Because we come from a model. We don't want to go back where we were, because where we were was a place where there was tremendous concentration of income, capital, and resources, where there is an extractivist model that we want to overcome. And also there is a culture of privilege favoring elites, not only of the region, but of the world. And what is it that we need? We need institutional paths, because we cannot be in chaos. There are institutional paths, and these roads are being opened. In my view, Uruguay and Costa Rica are two countries that have shown us a long way in this sense. Both of them, because they are the most egalitarian societies of the region. That doesn't mean that they have no problems. They do, as everyone. But there is greater inclusion in their societies and greater access. And we see this in this very clear pandemic, showing us that services, for example, of health, should be made available to all in a free basis. Open up institutional roads. And I'm in a place in Chile that is opening up this institutional road with a constituent and assembly that has never before has parity, men and women, and chaired by a woman representing the indigenous peoples. The world is changing, and there are institutional ways. Escazu is one, Aarhus, and 2030 agenda is showing us this road. And these are roads to build back better, because the pandemic has caused unprecedented damage. It has conditioned our development possibilities and has evidenced the structural problems and vulnerabilities existing in our region, magnifies asymmetries. Imagine the one we are facing today in the access to vaccines. We monitor every day access to vaccines. There are countries today, for the first time since the pandemic began, there are vaccines in Haiti, but none have been, people have not been immunized. That's the problem, tremendous asymmetries. And we have Europe that is already immunized above 35%. of the total population, the US 46%, our region 30%, thanks to countries that have reached high vaccination rates like Uruguay and Chile, but there are others that have not entered the process. So global asymmetries of climate change that truly are leading us to think in a different world. We need we have overcome planet thresholds, laws of biodiversity that makes our natural capital be jeopardized, and the most affected regions are Central America and the Caribbean, but obviously the rest as well, but particularly the Caribbean and Central America, the most affected ones. Therefore, I'm so pleased that the Caribbean is so well represented in the Escazu Agreement. It is indispensable to connect emergency with recovery and transformative recovery. It is indispensable to reinforce the rule of law and strengthen a participatory democracy, safeguarding the rights, peace, and preventing social conflicts. At the same time, it becomes the productive infrastructure is being transformed. We cannot keep on doing the same thing and expecting different results. That's not going to happen. So the Escazu Agreement, you don't imagine what it has meant for ECLAC and for the whole region, because it set the basis, the foundation, unprecedented treaty, the first one signed by Latin America and the Caribbean, and that has deposited the instrument in the UN. It is a UN instrument, and it is also an agreement that safeguards. It is the first one that safeguards truly. The Aarhus Convention is our inspiring mother, but this agreement safeguards the rights of environmentalists, those fighting for life and give their lives for life. It is an unprecedented treaty that really safeguards present and future generations. We have 24 signatory countries, 12 are already party states, and we hope that the ratifying process of the missing ones will take place. But the ratification has been faster than expected, and the Escazu Agreement entered into force on 22 of April of 2021. And this shows the commitment of Latin America and Caribbean countries in implementing these provisions. So the first conference of the parties will be held in April of 2022, and in accordance with the mandate of the Escazu Agreement. And that is why, you know well, in New York, we are requesting the ECOSOC support with some minimum additional resources. We are speaking about $300,000 that we need in order to trigger, or start implementing the Secretariat of the Convention. And this is highly relevant because, yes, we can obtain extra budgetary resources, but we need stability, permanence, continuity. The Escazu Agreement is added to the Aarhus Convention that also speaks about Principle 10. That was our inspiration because it is 20 years back that entered into force. And we are full of joy and hope that this has been achieved. So improves access to data in the case of Aarhus and Escazu, improvement of access to information, to data, fundamental for democratic lives, and promotes efficient and effective public policies and institutions. Also focuses on persons and invites everyone to participate in decisions in an anticipated manner. It is to anticipate to environmental conflicts, because the investments coming to the region need to consult. And in that way, feasibility is provided. Otherwise, investors come, invest, and communities are mad, and therefore investments stop. So the Escazu Agreement is a tool of the many that can exist, and we want to make available the Observatory of Environmental Democracy set up by ECLAC. It is available, and I think, and it is so good to have representatives from Europe, Africa, Asia Pacific. I think it's so important because the time is now of reinforcing access to information, public participation, and justice. Only in that way we will be able that all of us together, all of us, we will build a more sustainable and resilient world, protecting the persons and our planet. Thank you, Jose Luis. Thank you to all the team of ECLAC for all this great support. Ambassador, Foreign Minister, authorities, thank you.
We thank Alicia Bárcena for her words, and we bring to an end this opening segment. And we now open up the panel discussion. The panel discussion will be in English. Remember that we have translation. We can work with both languages, and I'd like to offer the floor to Mrs. Su Yung-hwan, legal officer of the Unit of International Legislation of Ms. Su Yung-hwan, legal officer of the International Law Unit of UNEP. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Samaniego, for introducing me. So thank you, everyone. My name is Su Yung-hwan. I'm with the Law Division at UNEP, and I'm on behalf of UNEP. We're very pleased to co-sponsor this event and also be part of this wonderful event. And I'm also honored to moderate this first panel on intergovernmental experiences to empower people for the planet. I have the pleasure of introducing our distinguished panelists to share their expertise, knowledge, and experiences from diverse regions. We have 5 panelists with us today. So first we have His Excellency Pernell Charles Jr., Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment, and Climate Change of Jamaica. And we're also joined by Ms. Lina Heeman. She's in Legal Affairs Division, Swiss Federal Office for the Environment from Switzerland. And we also are joined by Mr. Gotran Yanefar Sum. He's with the Legal Affairs. He's a Legal Affairs Director with the Ministry of Environment and Fisheries from Burkina Faso. And we're also joined by unfortunately, by a video message of Dr. Amara Pusapich. She's a representative of Thailand of ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, AICHA. And last but not least, we're joined by Ms. Sophie Sandstrom. She's the first Secretary of Permanent Mission of Finland to the United Nations. A couple of notes on the modalities of the panel. So panel will be structured in a roundtable discussion, and each panelist will be given 1 question and provided with about 3 minutes to respond to the question. And given that we have an amazing lineup of panelists, but unfortunately the limited time, so I will invite the panelists to be mindful of the time constraints. With no further ado, let me go straight to inviting the first panelist, Excellency Pernell Charles Jr. So, Minister, Jamaica has so the Minister, I think you're online. So here goes the question. So, Minister, Jamaica has exercised an outstanding leadership in the environmental field in the recent years. Your country played a notable role in the negotiation of 2 recent multilateral environmental agreements, the Minamata Convention and the Escazu Agreement. Jamaica was also one of the first 10 signatories to the Declaration on Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration in Latin America and the Caribbean at Rio +20 in 2012. That vowed to strengthen the implementation of environmental access rights in the region and also resulted in the region's first environmental treaty. So what has been Jamaica's experience in the Escazu Agreement, and how can this instrument catalyze transformative action for people and planet, especially in a COVID-19 context? So I invite you, Ms. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, and let me firstly say thank you to you Ms. Suyong Huang, and I have to apologize for not having my camera on. I've been trying to do so, but the technology doesn't always succeed. So permit me to proceed with audio. I'm of course acknowledging Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica, our Ambassador of Uruguay to the United Nations, Madam Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Ms. Barcina, and all of my distinguished colleagues, excellencies, delegates, participants. I think we could not have had a more relevant and important topic. It's timely, and it really speaks to what is necessary as we move towards this post-COVID-19, just grappling with all that we have had to deal with as a global community, and also acknowledging the long-term potential impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially for the most vulnerable amongst us, which includes those small developing states like Jamaica. But we like to take it from a perspective of understanding that though the pandemic has presented us with significant challenges, it has afforded us an opportunity for more discussion, for us to reinforce where necessary how we're going to build on systems to move towards an equitable, fair, and just world for generations to come. On April 22nd of this year, a significant step was made globally, but more specifically within Latin America and the Caribbean region, in the promotion of access rights with the entry into force of the Regional Agreement on Access to Information, Public Participation, and Justice in Environmental Matters in our region, and it's referred to as the Escazu Agreement. Now, the tenets of the agreement are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals 16, particularly speaking to the need to ensure public access to information and to protect fundamental freedoms. And it is critical. Indeed, this agreement has chartered several new pathways. Notably, it is the first legally binding agreement in the world to include provisions on human rights defenders in environmental matters, which is critical. And the United Nations defines the environmental human rights defenders as individuals and groups who in their capacity are peaceful as they seek to strive to protect human rights relating to the environment, including water, air, land, flora, and fauna. The work of these human rights defenders has become increasingly more critical to governments like our government here in Jamaica. Additionally, the Escazu Agreement, like the ARIS Convention and other similar instruments, seeks to secure not only the public right of access to environmental information, but also the public's right to actively and proactively participate in the decision-making process. Now, this, my colleagues, is very important because it is going to stimulate not only an understanding in terms of protection, but hopefully an interest in having informed public and also informed government. It is common knowledge that where citizens are empowered through access to information, they themselves can better appreciate the role they have to play in protecting the environment. Of course, the foundation on which access to information and full and effective participation is built is access to justice. And so citizens must at all times have access to the judicial system for redress and remedy in environmental matters. In the Latin America and Caribbean region, I know that ECLAC has advised that approximately 60% of the countries recognize the right of individuals to live in a healthy environment in their constitutions, and that's very important. And we have 60% that have enacted laws related to access to information. Jamaica, a small state, we have instituted or are in the process rather of instituting the necessary systems that will allow our country to fully comply with the provisions of the Escazu Agreement, and by extension, several of the elements of the SDG 16. And we recognize the nexus between the two. So as we talk about access, we also speak about justice. and we highlight the need. It is essential that there's also cooperation at all levels to tackle climate change, to advance the environmental agenda. Hence, the empowerment of the peoples of the world through access to information, through access to justice, through public participation is more important now than it has ever been. Another recent development, as I close off, in terms of multilateral environmental agreements is a recognition of the linkage between a healthy environment and human health. That is something which I want colleagues to reiterate. An example of the linkage is the Minamata Convention on Mercury, which includes a provision on health aspects. And this explicit reference to human health in relation to a global environmental challenge, is yet another entry point for other intergovernmental processes in tackling a common issue in a very integrated way. So we're connecting our environment to how we live and to our own health. Let me close by saying that devising participatory and inclusive solutions for us to build forward better through access to information and access to justice is relevant. Ms. Bastina, it is so relevant to us in small countries, particularly because of our vulnerabilities. We face unprecedented challenges together, all of us on this call. And when we couple that with the sea level rise, the ocean acidification, the hurricanes, the floods, the droughts, and even volcanic eruptions that we've seen in our region, we know that for some, it is theory, but for others, the existential threat is now. And so we have to bind together. I want to close off by saying thank you to all that have put this dialogue together. It is so important for us to bind together and to be able to foresee the crisis and its potential impacts so that we can take the necessary preemptive measures to define a sustainable solution. Therefore, no single government, no single stakeholder can overcome our challenges. We have to do it together. It requires leadership, solidarity, bold collective action. I therefore welcome this dialogue with my fellow Latin American and Caribbean countries and other regions across the world as we seek to make environmental access rights the cornerstone of our recovery efforts. Thank you, my colleagues.
Thank you very much for your very powerful speech and the answer to the question, Minister. So it was really good to actually hear also the perspective from the small developing island country. And also I found it really, really touching that you see COVID-19 as a challenge, but also an opportunity that we can move forward and how the environmental rights are helping and empowering people. And that is also helping informing people, but also the government, and so that we can all work in a partnership. And also that all of this, the unprecedented environmental challenges that we're in is not just one government, one country, and one person or community can do that. We'll all have to be together in this. So thank you very much for your really, really amazing answer to the question. And now we'll move on to our second panelist, Ms. Lina Heeman. So Ms. Heeman, so here is your question. Switzerland ratified the AUS Convention in 2014. And what has been your country's experience in the implementation of the AUS Convention so far? And what benefits do you see in other recent initiatives, such as the Escazu Agreement in Latin America and in the Caribbean? Over to you, Ms. Heeman.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks. Distinguished colleagues, as Su Young said, Switzerland ratified the AUS Convention in 2014, and there we are the latest party to have joined the convention, in fact. Before the ratification, Swiss legislation already contained various provisions on the access to information, public participation, and access to judicial procedures. However, there were some adjustments of legislation necessary. So Switzerland was obliged to adopt further legislation concerning specific access to environmental information and public participation on certain environmental activities. The legislation concerning a broad access to justice was also complemented in conformity with the convention. So what happened after that? The implementation of the Aarhus Convention was followed by quite a high demand of access to environmental information. And within the last years, with rising awareness for environmental issues, the number of demands has been increasing constantly. We experience a really growing need for information by the public. The access to information also has an influence on public participation on environmental matters, obviously. So the public, and in particular NGOs, actively participates in developments and adoption of almost all important regulations, decisions, projects, programs, or plans in Switzerland by now. So Switzerland experiences that a more informed public also provides very valuable inputs when participating. So it ultimately contributes to a higher quality and higher acceptance of governmental and private projects. So even though it's it's a lot of things to do, it's very important that the public informs itself and participates. And finally, our jurisdiction also applies the principle of the Aarhus Convention now in its case law, and its importance and influence is gradually increasing. However, of course, the public still has to come forward and claim their rights, and sometimes that's not as easy as it should be, to be honest. There are some obstacles they have to overcome, but it is the case law is growing in relation to the Aarhus Convention. Concerning the second part of your question about the benefits of other initiatives, we would like to express our really strong support for these developments. The adoption of similar agreements allows a lively exchange of knowledge and experience, while acknowledging cultural characteristics that may demand for a more distinguished approach when it comes to the implementation of the principles of these conventions and the so famous 3 pillars. We consider the information and participation of the public on environmental matters as crucial to unlocking transformative change for people and the planet. However, we do recognize that each world region's cultural, climatic, social, and environmental differences may require just more individual solutions. So Switzerland only ratified the Aarhus Convention 7 years ago. It's not that long in comparison to the 20th anniversary of the Aarhus Convention this year. And we believe that it's of great value to exchange our experiences here with other countries that introduced the 3 pillars rather recently, and those who have been implementing them for longer, like I think France and the UK. We are looking forward to the future exchange between individual countries all over the world, as well as between the institution of the Aarhus Convention and the Escazu Agreement. We would really appreciate that. So thank you very much. That's all for me. I hope it wasn't too long.
Thank you, Ms. Heeman. That was excellent. You're right on time. So it was really good to hear about actually the national experience about how the Aarhus Convention changed the national, the atmosphere and the terrain of implementing the regional, the implementation in the national space, and also hear about actually how challenging the public participation is, because it's really not an easy task. So it takes a lot of time for people to actually learn about their rights and also like have tools to participate in the environmental matters. So thank you so much, Ms. Heeman. And so we'll now move on to I'll invite Mr. Gotran Yandafar Sam. He's from Ministry of Environment and Fisheries, Burkina Faso. So Mr. Sam, you have the floor. You'll be invited to a question. So here's your question. So Burkina Faso has recently been elected as member of the steering committee of the Montevideo Program 5. How do you consider the program relates to SDG 16 and treaties such as the Aarhus Convention and the Escazu Agreement? What challenges and opportunities do you see from the African perspective? So over to you, Mr. Sam. So let me give one moment. So Mr. Sum, could you hear us? So, okay, so I see.
Yeah, I'm trying to contact him by the chat because I don't think so. His microphone is closed, so now it's open.
Okay, so then what maybe like, so while we're sorting out the technical glitch, we'll move on to the next panelist in the interest of the time. So I'll invite the video message of Dr. Amara Pungsapik, the representative of ICHAR. She is unfortunately not able to join us live today, but she kindly sent a video message. So could the message be played, please?
Thank you for the invitation for me to join the high-level panel side event on the issue of SDG 16 and COVID-19 today. I've been asked to talk about my experiences working on human rights and environment in the Southeast Asian context. First, on the topic of COVID-19 and sustainable recovery. COVID-19 is both social and economic crisis. It is a wake-up call for us, human beings, to recognize the close connection between human beings and other natural beings. The new normal should be nature-based human development. Our experience in the pandemic and transboundary nature of COVID-19 make us realize that the efforts needed to recover from the pandemic must be transboundaries. To achieve the goals, the SDG 16 requires procedural commitment and can be classified as procedural rights, and Goal 17, partnership for the goals. My point regarding my personal experiences. First, regarding the implementation of public participation, access to information, and access to justice. The interpretation of public participation by authorities used to be partial participation only, meaning that if certain number of people attended the event, it was sufficient to call the meeting public participation. There are a few available tools to deal with procedures involved in public participation, indicating that public participation must take place at all decision-making stages. The word stakeholders have been adopted to include everyone who are involved or being impacted, either directly or indirectly, short-term or long-term, and intentional or unintentional. In earlier days, access to information was unknown. Some types of information are classified and not public. It used to be difficult, if not impossible, to acquire an EIA report. Two excuses are: one, the reports are technical and are not necessary for the general public. And two, business confidentiality, both technical know-how and financial. The concept of access to justice has been more recently discussed. The implication here is that in addition to access to information, people should have the opportunity to file complaints on negative impact caused by the project. Built-in grievance procedures, mitigation procedures, redress and remedy procedures should be made available in the project implementation document. Regarding partnership on transboundary issue, when I was with the Thai National Human Rights Commission, we received complaints on transboundary investment impacting on local people. There were cases of Thai nationals being impacted by project activities of foreign investors on Thai soil, and cases of Thai nationals investing in foreign land impacted on local people. The issues involved nationality of investors, implementing agencies, and people being impacted. The question is, who is responsible for transboundary impact assessment? Partnership between relevant partners are necessary. In conclusion, To enable sustainable recovery to the new normal, the recovery strategy can take into consideration existing instruments and or tools. In addition to agreement and conventions developed at national and regional levels, such as the Aarhus Convention in Europe and the Escazu Regional Agreement in Latin America, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, adopted in 2011, introduces human rights due diligence and human rights impact assessment as tools to incorporate public participation, access to information, and access to remedy in the project description and implementation plan. For grievance mechanism, they are both state-based and non-state-based mechanisms, as well as judicial and quasi-judicial mechanisms. The recovery stage needs to be in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Goals 16 and 17 cover and encourage adoption of practices promoting procedural rights. For ASEAN region, we are working on regional agreement to facilitate the achievement of these goals. The experience in ASEAN indicates that it took about 10 years from the year the proposal was made to the year the agreement became effective. In 2002, ASEAN proposed the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution to be signed by ASEAN member states. We achieved our goals of ASEAN regional cooperation by successfully obtaining 10 signatures in 2014, and that's 12 years. In addition, the ASEAN Declaration Against Trafficking as non-legal binding instrument was recognized at the time of the adoption of the ASEAN Charter in 2007. The declaration became the Convention Against Trafficking in Person or ACTIV and adopted as legally binding instrument in the year 2015. And the convention became effective in 2017 after ratification of 6 out of 10 countries. So let me end my talk at this stage. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Phong Sapik. So I think it was really interesting actually to hear a lot about what's been going on in ASEAN countries, and also like how the initiative started and some of them translated into like being a treaty and the regional corporations in that regard. And I also found actually the what she mentioned about the transboundary issues, which is really a big topic, and that actually tells us like all the environmental issues, and COVID-19 doesn't really have a border. Only people we know the border. So that actually corresponds to a lot of other panelists talked about like international the solidarity and also like cooperation and working together on these issues. So with thank you very much, and then we'll move on to the next panelist. So I invite Ms. Sophie Sandstrom from the mission of Finland to the UN. So Ms. Sandstrom, if you're online, so here is your question. So in Finland's view, what advantages does the Aarhus Convention offer to its parties? And what lessons learned can you offer to parties of the Escazu Agreement and to other regions that are exploring similar initiatives? So over to you, Ms. Sandstrom.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all the panelists and the excellencies who've spoken earlier at this very, very interesting event and very important event at this year's HLPF, and thank you for having us here as a panelist to share some of Finland's experiences. I will try and be quite brief because I know time is of essence here. So for Finland, in terms of our international commitments, the Aarhus Convention and its protocol are the backbone of the implementation of the environmental dimension of SDG 16. We see that treaties offer a clear legal framework and guidance on the implementation of SDG 16. The Aarhus Convention Compliance Committee is a strong and well-respected mechanism. it's open to the public, and it has transparent procedures. We regard this as a best practice among international environmental treaties that can be replicated elsewhere. Treaties also offer important platforms for dialogue among authorities, experts, civil society, and other stakeholders. Regular meetings under the Aarhus Convention, where civil society have broad participation rights, has highlighted issues that would not necessarily have been brought to our attention at the national level otherwise. And we highly value this exchange of information. At a national level, one important lesson learned is the benefit of civil society involvement, both in national and international processes related to the environment. For example, we have a formally appointed National Working Group on Biodiversity, which facilitates the implementation and monitoring of the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan by preparing positions on biodiversity issues and organizing active discussions. The working group includes government actors, the Sami indigenous people, NGOs, scientists, youth, and other stakeholders. This institutionalized involvement of the public enriches discussions and brings valuable expertise to the table. It also makes for good informal cooperation among working group members. So, in light of our experience related to the Aarhus Convention, we therefore warmly welcome the entry into force of the Escazu Agreement, and we're pleased to see that access rights are one of the proposed focus areas of UNEP's Montevideo 5 program for development of environmental law. We look forward to taking part in cooperation and sharing of experience in this area. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sandstrom. So it was really good to hear about actually the Finland's experience, and it was really also like interesting to that you mentioned about the compliance committee, because I think a lot of things that we have, the UNEP's report says that we have since the 1970s we have 38 times more environmental laws around the world, but so it's not just about having the laws, but also implementing the laws and also making sure that we have a strong compliance mechanism that that implements these laws. So thank you so much for pointing this out as well. And now I hear that Mr. Sum is available, and we have resolved the technical issues. So Mr. Sum, are you with us? Okay. So we're very, very sorry. The technical issues seem to be continuing. So we'll just have to wrap it up this first panel. And thank you so much for all the panelists and all this rich sharing of your experience, and also telling us, sharing about how your regional experiences, your country-specific experiences, and sharing all this knowledge with us. And from all this, I think I was trying to do my own words crowd. My paper, and I think a lot of things came out. The common things that came out is a lot about the empowerment of people, and also the the achievement of SDG 16, how the environmental rights can help achieve SDG 16, and the importance of cooperation, also like sharing the knowledge. So I think that's strong, came out really strongly from the first panel, first panel. So thank you so much, and I want to thank also everyone else who being with us today. So I will I'll bring the first panel to the end, and I'll be passing the floor back to Mr. Samaniego. Back to you, Mr. Samaniego.
Thank you, Ms. Soo-young. Thank you for this great job. You had a tough call with Mr. Sum, but we couldn't solve that difficulty. It is my pleasure now to introduce for our second panel, our moderator, Ms. Katinka Weinberger, who's my peer. She's the chief of the Environment and Development Policy section at the Economic Commission for Asia Pacific. She will lead this panel on national and sub-regional considerations in the implementation of environmental access rights for a sustainable recovery. Ms. Weinberger, please, you take the floor now.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and delegates, distinguished participants, a very good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, I would really like to commend the governments of the member states who are hosting this event, and also ECLAC for inviting us and our sibling regional commissions to co-host it. I would briefly like to introduce the panelists of the second session, and perhaps those that are in the room could turn on their videos. We have Ms. Kate Wilson, legal officer of the government of Santa Lucia. We have a video by Her Excellency Yuyun Wahyuningrum, representative of Indonesia to the Asean Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. Mr. Alex Winston, policy advisor in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the United Kingdom. And then another video by Mr. Thomas Legupil, Office of Global Affairs in the Ministry for the Ecological Transition of France. And finally, but of course not least, Ms. Rosario Diaz-Garavito, founder and chief executive director of the Millenniums Movement. And very nice to have you here online. Please allow me, before we begin the second panel discussion, to share some very brief perspectives from the Asia-Pacific region, which, as you know, currently does not have a regional agreement in place. In the Asia-Pacific region, we see major disparities in the Global Environmental Performance Index. We have some countries in our region which score very high, while others score very low. And therefore, activities such as this dialogue on empowering people to protect the planet in the COVID-19 context is a really good opportunity for us to learn from each other, to accelerate action, and to increase environmental performance in the region. I believe that we share fundamental challenges in all regions that hinder environmental protection and sustainable development. They, of course, include, and we've already heard some of them earlier, gender imbalances, which persist in political participation. In some countries in Asia and the Pacific, we see obstructed, narrowed, and repressed civic spaces. And a third area of concern is the convergence of inequalities, for example, with climate change. And the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these environmental challenges, and we see that the impacts are very unevenly distributed among vulnerable and marginalized groups, including women and indigenous communities. Now, as we recover from the impacts of the pandemic, we at ESCAB are committed to advancing access rights on environmental decision-making. And in 2018, we began the implementation of a project funded by the government of Sweden to foster the inclusive engagement of marginalized and vulnerable groups for better environmental outcomes. In doing so, we are really capitalizing on the experience of successful instruments such as the Escazu Agreement and the Aarhus Convention. And we really envisage opportunities with a similar ambition for Asia and the Pacific. And with the support of intergovernmental organizations such as the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, which is also represented here today, we firmly believe that these entry points for regional instruments in Asia and the Pacific can materialize in the hopefully near future. And against this backdrop, I would like to open this panel with our first intervention. I would like our panelists to be short and to the point. And I will now turn to Ms. Kate Wilson. As an Eastern Caribbean small island developing state, St. Lucia faces significant challenges in its pursuit to sustainable development. Can you please tell us what place the Escazu Agreement occupies in the scenario in your country, and how can the pressing needs of SIDS countries be addressed through this agreement? Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I know we are pressed for time, but I want to recognize my fellow panelists and also to express our regret to CARICOM that is reeling from the brutal assassination of the president of Haiti. And as you know, that St. Lucia is in the midst of an election campaign. I would like to say that we want to bring warm greetings from the government and people of St. Lucia, and in particular the Department of Sustainable Development, where I serve as legal officer and which is headed by our minister, the Honorable Gail T.C. Rigobert, and her permanent secretary. In terms of the question, Madam Moderator, I also, before I do this, let me also thank the governments of Uruguay, Costa Rica, Switzerland, France, and of course the regional commissions for putting on this very, very important side event. You know that we are meeting at a time when the COVID pandemic, we are experiencing inequalities which have been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. We have just recently recovered from Hurricane Elsa, which hit our country 2 weeks ago. But I dare say, despite all of this, that over the horizon, there appears to be a glimmer of hope for recovery. The kind of resilient recovery that sees more persons being vaccinated against the deadly COVID virus and its new strains, and a determined effort to find nature-based solutions to our environmental issues. And more importantly, to leave no one behind in the process of achieving the sustainable development goals, with all stakeholders having a seat at the decision-making table. As a small island developing state, we run into a lot of problems. But what we have recognized, what St. Lucia has recognized, is that the only route to a resilient recovery is to have sustainability at the core of all national plans and programs. The 3 pillars of sustainable development, economic, environmental, and social concerns, must be balanced in the development process. And so, because St. Lucia has understood that, we have recognized the importance of the Escazu Agreement as an effective human rights tool that will allow us to attain the effective implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Sustainable Development Goal 16, which calls for peace, justice, and strong institutions. That must be the moral compass by which St. Lucia builds its true democracy. Access rights to information, effective participation by the public, and access to justice has been our top priority. Ever since the negotiations towards the agreement began, we were present. We joined the negotiations in Argentina during the 7th round, and we have been visible and participated every step of the way. In fact, we were one of the first to sign the agreement when it was opened for signature at the United Nations headquarters in New York in 2018. We have ratified the agreement, and since it came into force on April 22nd, we have put in place, or we are in the process of putting in place at the national level, what it is that the agreement requires for effective implementation. So a comprehensive concept note is en route to our minister, which contains all the things that the agreement is asking for us to put in place. And we will hear a little more about this as I talk in terms of how we will use this concept note to achieve our sustainable development goals. So towards the second part of the question, good governance and the rule of law, as well as creating an enabling environment, is so essential for the development of sustainable development goals, for the achievement of sustainable development goals, for sustained and inclusive economic growth, social development, environmental protection, and the eradication of poverty and hunger. All these are sustainable development goals that we are looking at. We need to see affordable and renewable energy resources, better healthcare and affordable healthcare, financing, better debt financing and cushioning, monitoring and evaluation systems, data collection, clean water and sanitation. St. Lucia has recognized that good governance can only be achieved if the principles of accountability and transparency, as espoused in the Escazu Agreement, is promoted by small island developing states. There must be trust in public institutions. That is why that concept note, which I spoke about, makes provision for the establishment of independent oversight mechanisms. The facilitation of independent performance reviews as well as a framework for the production of sustainability reports by private and public companies with emphasis on producer responsibility. We have received the recommendations of our legislative and regulatory review from the World Resources Institute, and we are anxious to now look at our public health laws, our planning laws, our environmental laws, as well as our freedom of information laws, to see how we can put access rights, make them more expressively involved in those legislation, as well as in our constitution. At the heart of the Escazu Agreement is combating inequality and discrimination, and to guarantee the rights of all persons to sustainable development, with particular attention to persons and groups in vulnerable situations. Madam Moderator, persecution, abuse, and injustice, especially of our women, children, persons with disabilities, elderly, the LGBTIQ folks, and environmental defenders, can be reduced and totally eliminated if we apply the principles of equity in our social protection programs, timeliness and correctness in our enactment of legislation, for example, putting in sunset clauses in our emergency response legislations without prejudice or compromise to individual or societal rights as guaranteed under the Constitution of St. Lucia. We must have gender mainstreaming in our policies and programs. We must have more innovative and digitalized education. We must address the issue of having decent work and address the overall issue of unemployment. The Escazu Agreement mandates that SIDS like St. Lucia put in place mechanisms for the generation and dissemination of environmental information. So we look towards putting in place very soon early warning systems to combat imminent threats to public health, to the environment. The establishment of a pollutant release and transfer register covering air, soil, and water that would greatly assist in reducing climate change related problems. The National Environmental Information System that has already begun in St. Lucia, and it can serve as a repository for critical information like state of the environmental reports, environmental impact assessments, and other scientific and technological reports, studies from research institutions and academic institutions, all of which the Escazu Agreement speaks to. We must not forget the blue economy, access rights to the management of our oceans and marine system, and reduction of marine pollution and litter is critical. Economic development and the growth of consumer rights is another way the Escazu Agreement can help us with pressing issues. Consumers should have official, relevant, and clear guidance on the quality of goods and services and their effects on health, promoting sustainable production and consumption patterns, setting common standards in the region, which could help us reduce hunger and promote food security. St. Lucia is aware that the effective implementation of the SDGs cannot be realized without strong cross-sectoral coordination. Government must open the door to dialogue and input from all, especially the youth, vulnerable, and marginalized. Therefore, we must formulate a collaborative network with the regional public mechanism under the Escazu Agreement and liaise closely with the elected representatives of the public to enhance the input and participation of the public, especially civil society, in the attainment of the SDGs. Increased efficiency results when there is a sharing of resources, particularly with civil society and grassroots organizations. The Escazu Agreement—
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Wilson. Sorry to interrupt, but we're really pressed for time. And I really like the positivity in the message that you gave us, that green recovery is possible, and the Escazu Agreement can be the framing, the guiding principle to achieve that. And thank you very much again for your excellent statement. I would now like to move on to Mr. Alex Winston, on the other side of the planet, to the UK. As a party to the Aarhus Convention, the United Kingdom has a long tradition of implementing environmental access rights. How does the Aarhus Convention support environmental management in your country? And how does the UK view the Escazu Agreement in Latin America and the Caribbean? Over to you, please.
Thank you, moderator, for the opportunity to speak. And thank you to the previous speakers for their fascinating contributions this evening. The Aarhus Convention and its pillar on access to information have an important part to play in supporting environmental management in the United Kingdom. The pillar is implemented domestically via the Environmental Information Regulations, or EIRs, and in Scotland through equivalent devolved legislation. Public authorities' performance in responding to requests for environmental information is also regulated by the UK Information Commissioner's Office and, for Scotland's public authorities, the Scottish Information Commissioner. Both Information Commissioners handle complaints about the public authority's responses, and if the decision goes against the public authority, must either comply or challenge the decision in the tribunal. Considering the public interest arguments for and against disclosure is vital. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many members of the public have taken the opportunity to reconnect with nature. Disclosure also means sharing valuable information about the state of the environment. It can help people identify how they can make an active contribution. The information can be used to hold public authorities, polluters, and developers to account, such as through newspaper articles, campaigns, and responses to consultations. Proactive disclosure is also vital in putting environmental information into the hands of ordinary members of the public, journalists, scientists, and businesses for a variety of purposes. Flood alerts are published proactively by the Environment Agency, giving warnings of adverse weather events to local communities. DEFRA publishes information on air pollution so that individuals can see daily forecasts for their area, and scientists can have access to reusable data for their own research. And as a final example, the Waste and Resources Action Programme, or WRAP, which is funded by DEFRA, the Welsh Government, and the Scottish Government, has set up the Product Sustainability Forum to encourage organisations to work collaboratively on product environmental information. The forum is a collaboration of over 80 organisations, including grocery and home improvement retailers and suppliers, academics, NGOs, and government representatives. It provides a real platform to work together to measure, reduce, and communicate the environmental performance of the grocery and home improvement products. Data and information will be published and freely available on the internet. The Product Sustainability Forum is also working with the United Nations Environmental Programme, or UNEP, to develop collaborative actions with similar initiatives around the world. So moving on also, and finally, to the second part of the question, the United Kingdom is supportive of the Aarhus Convention's efforts in corresponding and collaborating with international forums, hence its participation in today's meeting. And we are also supportive of the aims and intentions of the Escazu Agreement in furthering and further strengthening environmental governance in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for sharing that, how in the aftermath of COVID, the existing agreement, the Aarhus Convention, has received more of relevance and renewed relevance in providing access to information as consumers have taken the opportunity to reconnect with nature. And thanks also for your statements of support to the Aarhus, to the Escazu Agreement. With this now, let me move to Ms. Rosario Diaz Carativo, who we're asking on why are environmental access rights important for youth in a COVID-19 context? How can you benefit from initiatives such as the Escazu Agreement? And over to you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Petinka, for giving me the floor, and thank you for inviting me to this space. I'm very excited to be with you and share a little bit the points of view of young people or my peers that we have been working collectively. Regarding the importance of environmental access, something that we need to consider when we talk about young people is that we are still consolidating an intergenerational approach, and that needs to keep working. And having environmental access, right of access, is very important, because then young people is going to be able to participate on decision-making processes that are right now defining what is happening on their present and can affect what is going to happen on their future. Achieving this intergenerational approach, but achieving also this intergenerational justice, because that at some point, you know, the time is going to pass, requires that the rights or the access to information, the access for mostly when it's about environmental matters, is open for young people and the younger generation, young people, and also the younger generation. So I'm talking about children and adolescents as well. So we can actively participate. And during the COVID time, this is very important because many young people across the world, and especially in the Latin American and Caribbean region, we have been put in a very hard and complex situation where our livelihoods, sometimes when we are talking about young people living on the rural areas or young people living on indigenous community, depends a lot from their environment and their ecosystem. So having the chance to have access for environmental information will allow them to participate and be part of the decision-making process whenever they are referring to the enabler space that is going to allow them to develop properly and also to live a life with dignity. But also when we talk about the post-pandemic, we think about why these rights of access are important. Is because we need to ensure that the recovery from the pandemic is not aggressive and it doesn't go against our ecosystems and against the efforts we are doing in order to fight against climate change. So if we have this information, we can at least ensure that people know what are the decisions that are being taken, especially young people, and we can activate, we can also advocate for so the right decisions are taken. And this recovery doesn't imply that we are going to damage our environment or that we are going to go against the rights of other people or their livelihoods. And mostly that the human rights of environmental defenders, many times young people, are respected and are observed whenever these decisions are being taken. How can we benefit from this? Definitely we can consolidate our systems, at least in the Latin American and Caribbean region, where we are living in a kind of permanent political crisis. It's important that our systems are consolidated in such a way that we can have some certainty. And the Escazu Agreement, it's a very good tool because it wouldn't be only a tool to protect human rights of environmental defenders or help us to access for information to take these decisions, but also it will be a reference for other topics, other kind of information in other aspects or other spheres of decision-making processes. The Escazu Agreement can really help us to bring this analogy to all these spheres. Something that is also important is that this way we can actually move forward with the intergenerational justice I talked at the beginning. Having the Escazu Agreement would actually help young people or younger generations to move forward in their lives and have the opportunity to enjoy their environment, but also ensure that their environment and livelihoods are protected for the next ones who are coming on their place. So I think those will be my my interventions at this point, and I really thank you for inviting me to this space. And please give the voice and give a space for young people to engage in these processes, because the decisions that are affecting us in the future doesn't need a response in the future. They need a response right now at this moment. So we really need to engage young people, adolescents, and children on these processes such as the Escazu Agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for highlighting that agreements such as the Escazu Agreement really provide a frame that allows young people to join in decision-making processes and to have a say in what the future will bring. And we did hear your call, your very strong call, and we'll carry it forward to make sure that young people are always included. Thank you very much again. Excellent statement. I would now like to ask that the video of Her Excellency Yuyun Wahyuningrum is played, who had sent a video due to the late hour in Indonesia. And we had asked her to address, your country has made important strides towards strengthening rights-based approaches for environmental decision-making. What challenges and opportunities exist to further inform participatory environmental governance in Southeast Asia?
Hello, good evening, Jakarta time, and good afternoon for those who are in New York. Thank you for having me in this important panel on the national and sub-regional consideration in the implementation of environmental access rights for sustainable recovery. My name is Yuyun Wahyuningrum. I'm the representative of Indonesia to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. In this occasion, I would like to provide two topics under the outline of measures toward strengthening right-based approaches for environmental decision-making, and secondly, on the challenges and opportunities on participatory environmental governance in Southeast Asia. For the first point on the consideration in the implementation of environmental access rights to sustainable recovery, I would like to propose three considerations. The first one is that there should be a guarantee on civil political rights to include freedom of expression, opinion, access to information related to environmental issues as well as sustainable recovery programs. And those should be facilitated through legal framework, infrastructure, system in the governments, as well as enabling regulations. Secondly, a second consideration is that the information should be accessible in terms of language, readability, devices, and culturally sensitive. So general public, person with disabilities, indigenous people can have access to information, can also understand the meaning provided by the information. The third consideration, there should be a reaching out strategy to increase public participation in public policy making processes, especially to ensure the participation of women and minority groups. In relation to the opportunities and challenges on the environmental governance in Southeast Asia, I would like to start first with the normative framework available in ASEAN. The ASEAN Human Rights Declaration provides people participation as human rights guaranteed under Article 9. Right to seek, receive, impart, and access information is also guaranteed under Article 23. Right to a safe, clean, and sustainable environment is guaranteed under Article 28F. In the ASEAN cooperation environment, the document also mentioned about the guarantee of participation of stakeholders in developing regional policies in relation to sustainable development and environment. ASEAN Participatory Agenda actually has started or has issued in 1997 by the document called ASEAN 2020, which put together the ASEAN member states' regional commitment to create a community of caring society with greater participation of people and where civil society is empowered. The ASEAN Participatory Agenda also reflected in the Vientiane Action Program in 2004, Article 1.13 in the ASEAN Charter 2007, and in the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on People-Oriented, People-Centered ASEAN in 2015. These commitments are not without challenges. We have a lot of challenges. So for instance, there is an absence of shared responsibilities among ASEAN member states in dealing with issues related to the environmental governance. Secondly, there is a gap between commitment and implementation. Despite all commitments on participatory agenda in ASEAN, as well as there are a number of existing experiences and mechanism at the national level on the participatory governance structure, but at the ASEAN level, these commitments and experiences have not yet realized as the participatory mechanism into machinery of environmental governance. So it seems like it requires more efforts to regionalize the existing initial national initiatives as the regional project. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this statement and perspective from the ASEAN region. And I would now like to ask the organizers to play the video.
Into force 3 years later in 2001. And France ratified it on July 2002, almost 20 years from now. From the very beginning, France has been a strong supporter of the Aarhus Convention. Indeed, France was represented in the Aarhus Bureau of the Convention during nearly 10 years. And France is one of the first contributors to the Convention budget. Moreover, France has been leading the work on the promotion of the principle of the Convention in international forums. I will now present an example of a concrete benefit related to the implementation of the Aarhus Convention. It is related to the first pillar of the Convention, access to information. The French Ministry of Environment makes environmental information available through a website entitled Environment in France, l'environnement en France. It is a portal on environmental information. All the reports related to environment can be found in this portal. This website is a single entry point to many sources of environmental information. It is available free of charge. On this portal, one can find information on all projects likely to have a significant impact on the environment. It means projects which imply to prepare an environmental impact assessment report. Now, I would like to say some few words regarding the future. In October 2021, there will be the 7th meeting of parties of the Aarhus Convention. It is planned to adopt a declaration on environmental democracy for sustainable, inclusive, and resilient development. And it is stated in this declaration that parties of the Aarhus Convention welcome the entry into force of the Escazu Agreement and that we reiterate our willingness to continue to cooperate with parties, civil society, in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. In France, we consider that in a context where pressure on the environment are increasing, it is crucial to have such common framework to bring all stakeholders together. We consider that the Aarhus Convention is instrumental because we think that improving access to information and public participation in decision-making enhance the quality and the implementation of decisions. That's the reason why French authorities encourage all countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to ratify or adhere to the Escazu Agreement in the near future. Thank you for your attention. Wishing you the best.
Thank you very much for this perspective from France and also for the support to the Escazu Agreement. This brings us to the end of the second panel. And before I hand back to Mr. Samaniego, please allow me to just very quickly summarize. I think what all the presentations and interventions clearly showed was that frameworks for access to information, public participation, and justice are important because they ensure that there's a proper process in place, a proper process to ensure informed decision-making. And I guess that's especially important in a situation as we are in right now with so many uncertainties around us that the current pandemic brings, and when so many environmental, economic, and social aspects need to be considered at the same time. So again, congratulations to the Latin American and Caribbean region for having the agreement in place. And back over to you, Mr. Samaniego.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Weinberger. It's been a great moderation of this second panel. Before we move to our final section, let me just, in justice, say a few words about the messages of Mr. Gontran Jan Befar from the Legal Affairs Office of the Ministry of Environment and Fisheries that had a technical difficulty and he couldn't send his messages. So in a very short manner, let me communicate, especially to our viewers in the streaming, that he intended to inform us that there are initiatives in the country to allow for citizens to promote initiatives. There's an environmental law that allows for public participation during environmental impact assessments, and there are provisions to allow citizens to access to justice. Burkina Faso also approved a law on sustainable development on 2013 that makes emphasis on public awareness. And finally, on the specific question he was posed of the program of Montevideo and the opportunities it brings, he underlines that in the present condition of Burkina Faso, where they have the challenge of terrorism and COVID, it's a welcome opportunity to be able to fund environmental initiatives. So with that, you get a flavor of his message. And I would welcome now Ms. Janet Ranganathan, who's the Vice President for Research, Data, and Innovation from the World Resources Institute. The World Resources Institute is a long-time partner. He's served as a global secretariat for the Access Initiative Network that encompasses more than 250 civil society organizations in 60 countries worldwide, from Argentina to Zimbabwe. And they've been working to create a global movement promoting environmental democracy. The Latin American and the Caribbean members of the Access Initiative played an instrumental role in achieving the Escazu Agreement. So my question to Janet would be, based on the WRI experience in supporting states, both in Latin America and the Caribbean and elsewhere, how can treaties such as the Escazu Agreement contribute to, as Alicia Bárcena said, transformative recovery measures? The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to speak today. The World Resources Institute is a research-based organization that goes beyond research to find practical ways to protect the earth and improve people's lives. And a big part of how we do that is by advancing good governance. Access rights have been a consistent theme throughout my, believe it or not, 27-year tenure at the World Resources Institute. The power of publicly available corporate performance information in an accessible format, as exemplified by the US Toxic Release Inventory, made a huge impression on my early days at WRI. I saw how communities used information to track and compare companies' performance and drive improvements by naming, faming, and shaming. It also increased negotiations between companies and communities. Information enables participation, and participation drives better decisions that benefit the many instead of the few. And what is good for communities also turned out to be good for companies. Companies identified opportunities to prevent pollution, moving away from more expensive waste treatment. In 1999, 10 years after the launch of that toxic release inventory, the World Resources Institute founded the Access Initiative. Sorry, computers get stuck here, but the Access Initiative, as you mentioned earlier, is the world's largest network of civil society organizations, working to ensure people have the right and ability, and to emphasize that ability, it's not just the right, it's the ability to influence decisions about the natural resources that sustain their communities. The network was a force behind the ARIS and Escazu agreements. So your question, why should environmental democracy be the cornerstone of COVID recovery messages? Quite simply, transparency, accountability, and good governance, they're essential ingredients for achieving sustainable development goals. Access rights to sustainable development is what yeast is to bread. Without it, the Sustainable Development Goals will fall flat. Now, don't just trust WRI on this. We've just heard from an inspiring array of member states, representatives from member states, United Nations, and others about what access rights mean to them. Costa Rica, creating solidarity, co-participants in development. The Economic Commission for Latin America, a road to dialogue. Jamaica, stimulating an informed public and government. Thailand, access rights are human rights. Finland, the backbone for implementing SDG 16. ESCAP, Asia Pacific, fostering the inclusive engagement of marginal people. San Lucia, leaving no one behind. UK, holding those who damage the environment to account. The millennial movement, youth having a say in their future. We heard how access rights can support COVID recovery efforts that are greener, more resilient, and more prosperous for all. But I also know that many of the recovery responses could have been better if decisions were more transparent and inclusive. So how can treaties such as the Escazu Agreement contribute to COVID recovery plans and sustainable development more broadly? Three things. First of all, they must be financed and operationalized. They can't just be agreements on paper. So let me highlight three actions that this community that I'm speaking to today, including myself and my organization, must take. First, invest in building capacity for countries and members of the public to implement access agreements. Stable financial resources, access to technical expertise are essential to operationalize the core treaty functions. This includes supporting strong implementation and compliance mechanisms that citizens can use to address non-compliance. We must work together, the IRIS and the Escazu parties, international organizations, civil society, to ensure that everyone can exercise their access rights. Environmental defenders, for example, should not fear for their lives as they protect the fabric of life that we all depend upon. The Escazu Agreement can protect those who protect the planet and prevent land and environmental conflicts by creating timely institutional pathways and procedures. Second, expand access agreements around the world. Make no mistake, this newly ratified Escazu Agreement, while regionally focused, will have far-reaching impact, strengthening environmental democracy around the globe, just as the Aarhus Convention did 20 years ago. We must also support our friends in Africa and the Asia Pacific to create similar regional agreements that address their own context. Third, invest in removing barriers to access, especially for the most vulnerable in society. Even when granted access rights, the poor face insurmountable barriers, including low literacy, high costs, exposure to risk and participation, lack of documentation of even legal identity. Civil society and community groups, and especially government, can take steps to overcome these barriers. And I believe here digital technology can be a factor in leveling the playing field when people are given access to it. So let's not wait for things to get really bad. They're bad now, but let's not get even badder before we take access rights seriously. Together, we can raise the bar for good governance. And in doing so, we will empower people to create a more inclusive and sustainable society for all. Thank you. You were all inspiring. I'm even more energized to continue to work on this in the future. Back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Ranganathan. This has been a fabulous summing up of everything we heard throughout the panels. We are coming to a closure now. So just let me leave you with three messages which are really important for us and for all of us here, stakeholders of this effort. First of all, this can help a better recovery, a greener recovery. Second, we are having a fabulous chance in Latin America. It's an unprecedented opportunity. Third, we not only need commitment, we also need the funding nationally and internationally to make things work, to walk the talk. So Alicia mentioned at the beginning, we're in a bitter fight for a very small amount of money in the context of ECOSOC. These fights have to be won too, internationally and nationally. So thank you all very much for your attention. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for enriching this conversation. We're all partners in this long-term road. So see you soon. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you very much.